Hey, my Reddit story lovers. Welcome back to Bedtime Blocks. Tonight's story is one to wind down with, something you can just let play in the background as you get cozy and drift off. So settle in, let your thoughts slow down, and let me tell you this one. It all started with a dumb bet between me and my best friend Jake. We were sitting in my living room on a rainy Saturday, half watching a cooking show and half scrolling on our phones. At some point, Jake decided to tell me that he had a sixth sense for finding people online. Not like, oh, I found your old Facebook. I mean, he swore he could track down anyone's most hidden, embarrassing online footprint. Naturally, I called him out. All right, Sherlock, find my high school math teacher. Bet you can't. 5 minutes later, there she was. Turns out she runs a gardening blog where she writes angry reviews about cucumbers. I didn't even know cucumbers could be controversial. Somehow that spiraled into him daring me to pick someone from my contacts, and he'd find their secret online life. I scrolled randomly, stopped on Maya, a girl I'd met through a friend at a barbecue last year. Sweet, quiet, the type of person who apologizes when you bump into her. I figured she'd have, I don't know, an Etsy store selling candles. But Jake's eyes lit up when he started typing. And that's when it happened. He found her profile, not on Etsy, not on Instagram, but on a site I immediately recognized from far too many late-night Reddit threads. I froze. The username was definitely hers. Same profile picture as her old Facebook, except cropped tighter. It wasn't anything explicit on the preview, but the title alone made me drop my phone into the couch cushions like it was hot. Dude, Jake whispered, eyes wide. I think your candle girl is entrepreneurial. I'm not going to lie, I didn't know how to react. On one hand, it's 2025. People can do whatever they want to make money, and I respect the hustle. On the other hand, this was Mia, the same girl who once texted me to make sure I got home safe from a party because it looked like it might rain. Now she was, well, apparently running a whole side business I had no idea about. Jacobs, of course, was eating it up. He leaned back on the couch like a man who had just discovered gold in his backyard. So, you gonna subscribe? I shot him a look that could have peeled paint. What? I'm not that guy. He smirked. Sure, just curious, for science. The rest of the night, I tried to shake it off. We switched to playing Minecraft, but every time I mistimed a jump in parkour, Jake would chuckle under his breath and say, Candle Girl. It wasn't even funny after the fifth time, but of course he thought it was comedy gold. Later, lying in bed, my brain decided to do that thing where it replays awkward moments on a loop. Mia's face, the username, that little spark of curiosity. It wasn't even, you know, attraction. It was more like when you hear your quiet neighbor blasting heavy metal at 3 a.m. You're shocked, but also weirdly fascinated. By morning, I told myself I'd let it go. People have private lives, end of story. Or at least it should have been. But 2 days later, I ran into Mia at the grocery store. She was standing in the produce section holding 2 pineapples like she was weighing the fate of humanity. Mia, hey, I said, instantly regretting my enthusiasm. I sounded way too happy to see someone I barely knew outside of group hangouts. She smiled, that same shy smile I remembered. Oh, hey, how's it going? Small talk happened. Bananas were discussed. The weather was mentioned twice. And then she asked if I was doing anything that weekend. I stammered out something about just editing videos, my default excuse for avoiding plans. She nodded, then casually dropped, I'm working on a project. Now here's the thing. Before this week, that would have sounded completely innocent. But now, my brain went full detective mode. Was that the project? Was she casually telling me about it in a don't judge me way? Or was I just reading into it like an idiot? We wrapped up our grocery chat, and as I walked away, I realized something. I wasn't going to be able to let this go. Not until I knew the full story. So, like any responsible adult, I did the only logical thing. I texted my friend Claire. Claire knows everyone. She's the type of person who somehow gets invited to weddings for people she hasn't spoken to in 5 years. If anyone could give me the "what's up with Mia" rundown, it was her. Hey, random question, I typed. Do you know Mia well? The dots appeared instantly. Too well, I thought. Claire replied, Oh yeah, she's great, super creative. Why? Just curious, I said. What kind of, uh, projects does she do? There was a pause. Then another pause. Then the kind of pause where you start wondering if your Wi-Fi died. Finally, Claire wrote, Um, depends on what you mean by projects. Why are you asking? And that was the moment I realized. Claire knew. I debated for a solid 30 seconds before replying. My thumbs hovered over the keyboard like I was defusing a bomb. If I asked too directly, it'd sound like I'd been snooping. If I was too vague, she might just give me the, oh, she's nice, she likes painting answer, and that would be the end of it. Finally, I went with, just saw her the other day. She mentioned she was working on something. Sounded interesting. Claire hit me back with a laughing emoji. Not the polite ha ha one, the full on tears streaming down face emoji. Oh, she wrote. You mean that project? Yup, she knew. And now my curiosity was at maximum capacity. Claire didn't spill the details right away, though. She's the type to drag out a story like she's being paid per word. Let's just say, she continued, Mia is more business savvy than people think. And before you ask, no, I'm not giving you the link. I told her I wasn't looking for the link, which was technically true, but now I had confirmation from a trusted source that this wasn't just some mistaken identity. At this point, it wasn't even about Mia specifically. I was fascinated by the shift in how I saw her. In my mind, she'd always been the background character in my friend group. Kind, polite, maybe a little awkward. Now, suddenly, she was the plot twist. The quiet kid in the movie who turns out to be the mastermind. That night, Jake came over again, and I told him about running into her in my conversation with Claire. Of course, he thought this was the greatest development in the history of human interaction. You've got to talk to her about it, he said, grinning like a cartoon villain. Nope, I replied immediately. Absolutely not. Why not? What's the worst that could happen? Oh, I don't know. Awkwardness, embarrassment, eternal banishment from the friend group? Jake shrugged. Or maybe she laughs, tells you it's true, and you both move on. People are surprisingly chill when they know you know. I doubted that, but I also knew myself, and the more people told me not to do something, the more my brain started plotting how to do it. The next opportunity came way too soon. A week later, there was a small get-together at a mutual friend's apartment. I told myself I was going for the pizza. I was lying to myself. Mia was there wearing a hoodie that looked 3 sizes too big, sipping something from a paper cup. She looked exactly like someone who would be binge-watching documentaries on a Friday night. We ended up sitting near each other during a card game, and somehow, still don't know how, I blurted out, So, how's your project going? Her eyes flicked to mine for a fraction of a second. There was no gasp, no denial, just the smallest, almost imperceptible smile. Oh, she said, it's doing pretty well. And just like that, I knew. There was a moment after she said that where the whole room seemed quieter, even though people were still talking and laughing around us. It wasn't awkward silence exactly, but more like that point in a movie where the music fades and you know something important just happened. I nodded slowly, pretending like I was the kind of person who hears that answer and doesn't immediately want to launch into 20 follow-up questions. That's good, I said, sipping my drink like we were discussing something completely normal, like planting tomatoes. She didn't elaborate, and I didn't push it. We just drifted into another conversation about the best takeout spots in town. But there was this new layer between us now, like we'd quietly agreed on something without spelling it out. Later that night, as I was heading out, Mia caught me at the door. "Hey," she said, pulling her hoodie up over her head. "You're cool." It was such a short, simple thing to say, but in that context, I knew exactly what she meant. Over the next few weeks, things got weird, but in a good way. We started talking more. Not about that specifically, but just in general. She'd send me random memes. I'd send her photos of my cat doing bizarre poses. It felt normal, but there was always this unspoken thing hovering in the background. Jake, of course, couldn't let it go. "So, when are you going to tell her you know?" he asked one night while we were playing Minecraft. "I think she already knows I know," I said. "Yeah, but you need to say it," he insisted. "Otherwise, it's like you're both just pretending." I didn't agree, but part of me wondered if he was right. The turning point came when Mia invited me over to her place for a movie night. Her apartment was small but cozy, with that same slightly mismatched furniture you only get from a combination of IKEA runs and Facebook Marketplace finds. She made popcorn, I brought snacks, and we settled in to watch some old comedy we'd both seen a dozen times. Halfway through the movie, during a quiet scene, she paused it and turned to me. "So, you found it, huh?" she said, deadpan. I just stared at her for a second, caught completely off guard. Well, she laughed. "Don't worry, I'm not mad. You're not the first person to stumble across it." And just like that, the tension evaporated. I exhaled like I'd been holding my breath for a month. "Okay, yeah," I admitted, grinning in defeat. "I found it, totally by accident." "Uh-huh," she said with a smirk that told me she didn't believe the accident part for a second. I told her the whole chain of events, Jake's ridiculous internet detective challenge, the teacher's cucumber blog, and how my random scroll landed on her name. By the end of it, she was doubled over laughing. Wait, you mean to tell me that the reason you know about my side gig is because of cucumbers?" When she put it that way, it sounded completely absurd. She sat back against the couch and shrugged. "Honestly, I don't care. I'm proud of it. It pays more than my day job, and I get to do it on my own terms." And for the first time, I realized she wasn't embarrassed at all. In fact, she seemed kind of empowered. We ended up talking for hours, not about the content itself, YouTube, calm down, but about the business side of it. How she markets herself without using her real name, how she manages subscriptions like a pro, how she handles the occasional weird message without letting it ruin her mood. It was fascinating. In the same way, it's fascinating when someone explains how they make those insanely realistic cakes that look like shoes or onions. By the time the movie credits rolled, I felt like I understood her a lot more. Not just her work, but her as a person. Before I left, she grinned and said, "So, you gonna tell Jake you talked to me?" "Oh yeah," I said, "but I'm gonna make up 90% of it just to mess with him." And I did. The next day, Jake came over, and I told him an absolutely over-the-top version of events where Mia had a secret vault, 5 assistants, and a custom-built content palace. He believed me for a solid 10 minutes before I started laughing too hard to keep it going. That's the thing. The whole situation started out as this weird, awkward discovery, but it turned into one of the funniest, most unexpected connections I've made in years. Now, whenever I see Mia at group events, we exchange this subtle look that says, "Yeah, we know." And it's not awkward anymore. It's just part of the story. Of course, Jake wasn't satisfied leaving it there. A week later, he sent me a link to a random top 10 side hustles video and wrote, "Bet Mia's number one." I ignored him for about 20 minutes. Then I caved and sent back. At least she's not reselling used tires on Facebook Marketplace. It became a running joke between us, but in a weird way, it kept me from overthinking the whole thing. Instead of it being some giant, awkward secret, it turned into this lighthearted inside joke that only a few people even got. Mia, for her part, leaned into it. One time during a group dinner, the server asked her what she did for work. She smiled and said, "Marketing." I nearly choked on my drink. Technically true, just niche marketing. One night I was editing a video for my channel and saw Mia had posted a new Instagram story. Nothing risque, just a picture of her cat with the caption, CEO of Staring at Walls. I replied with strong leadership skills, and she sent back a crying laugh emoji. It struck me then that our friendship had actually improved because of all this. If I'd never found out, we probably would have stayed surface-level acquaintances forever. Now we were comfortable making dumb jokes and sharing random parts of our day. Then came the twist I didn't see coming. Mia messaged me one evening. "Hey, weird question. Would you help me with something for my project?" I froze mid-bite of my dinner. There were about 1,000 ways this could go, and 99% of them sounded like bad ideas. I typed back cautiously, "Define help." Turns out she needed someone to design a new logo for her page. Something minimal and abstract that wouldn't scream, "This is for content." I do some graphic design as a hobby, so I agreed. A few days later, I sent her a couple of mock-ups and she loved them. She even insisted on paying me, which I refused at first. But she just sent me a gift card with the note, "For all your cucumber-related trauma." The gift card thing became its own running gag. Every time we hung out after that, Mia would say something like, "Do I owe you another gift card for this?" When I helped her carry groceries once, she texted me later with a screenshot of a $5 coffee card and the caption, "Employee of the Month." It was around this time that Jake started pushing this wild idea that I should start a behind-the-scenes podcast with her. Not about her actual content, but about the business of running an online side hustle. "It'd be hilarious," he said, leaning back like he'd just invented the concept of electricity. "You could call it Content Confidential." I told him I'd think about it, which is my polite way of saying absolutely not. Then came the night everything almost got awkward again. We were at another group gathering, and one of those chaotic game nights where half the people are playing and the other half are just eating snacks and watching. Someone suggested a game of Most Likely To, where the group points to the person who fits a certain description. The prompt was, "Most likely to have a secret side hustle." Before I could even blink, every single person pointed at Mia. She just sat there calmly eating a pretzel and said, "Well, maybe." Everyone laughed and moved on, but I caught her glance at me from across the table. That quick, mischievous spark in her eyes. It was like we just pulled off the smoothest heist without saying a word. A few weeks later, Mia texted me out of the blue. "This is random, but do you want to come to a flea market with me?" Naturally, I said yes, expecting the usual vintage clothes and overpriced coffee stalls. Halfway through browsing, she stopped in front of a booth selling scented candles. She picked one up, sniffed it, and said, "Smells like profit." I laughed so hard I almost dropped my coffee. She was still making candle jokes months later. That's the thing about Mia. She has this way of owning the joke so completely that no one else can use it against her. And in a weird way, that's probably why I've respected her more ever since that first accidental discovery. The flea market day ended with one of those moments that sticks in your head for no reason. We were sitting on a low brick wall, sipping iced tea, bags of random purchases around us. She had this little smirk as she scrolled through her phone. "What?" I asked. "Nothing," she said, pocketing it. "Just funny how life works out." I raised an eyebrow. "In what way?" She shrugged. "If you'd told me a year ago that one of my closest friends would be someone who accidentally found my project, I'd have laughed in your face." That hit me a little. Because she was right. If you'd told me a year ago that I'd be here, Casually hanging out with Mia like we'd known each other forever, I'd have called you insane. But somehow, this bizarre, slightly awkward beginning had turned into something surprisingly solid. On the way home, I thought about how most people have things about them you'll never know unless you stumble into them by accident. Mia just happened to have one that was a little more marketable. But it made me wonder how many people in my circle had similar alternate lives I just hadn't uncovered yet. Probably more than I'd guess. A couple weeks later, Jake decided to stir the pot again. He texted me, "Game night at my place. Bring Mia, I have a surprise." I already didn't like the sound of that, but Mia was game for it. Literally. We got there, and the surprise turned out to be Jake's homemade trivia game called Guess the Side Hustle, where each card described a weird job and players had to match it to a random celebrity, fictional character, or a person in the room. It was all fun until Jake pulled a card and read, "Runs a highly successful online business that shocks their friends." Half the room turned to look at Mia. The other half turned to look at me. Mia didn't miss a beat. She pointed at Jake and said, "It's him. He resells cucumbers." The whole table erupted. I nearly fell off my chair. The callback to the cucumber blog from months ago was so smooth, it deserved its own standing ovation. From that moment, I knew the story of how I found Mia's OnlyFans would never just fade into the background. It was part of the lore now. Not scandalous, not awkward, just one of those legendary stories that gets told and retold until everyone knows it by heart. After the trivia night, the whole thing seemed to settle into a permanent part of our friend group's collective memory. It wasn't even about what Mia's side hustle was anymore. It was about the running jokes, the sly winks, the cucumber references that made absolutely no sense to anyone outside our circle. One night, a newer friend named Sam asked, "Okay, someone explain this cucumber thing to me." Mia just grinned and said, "It's classified." Jake added, "If you know, you know." And that was it. Sam was left looking like he'd just walked into the middle of a season finale without watching any of the earlier episodes. I liked that it stayed our thing. Not gatekeeping exactly, but just a little piece of chaos that belonged to us. In a world where every detail of your life can end up online, it felt rare to have a story that was both ridiculous and private in its own way. One Saturday afternoon, Mia invited a few of us over for coffee. She made these absurdly good cinnamon rolls, the kind that make you briefly consider proposing marriage. We sat around her kitchen table laughing about random stuff when she suddenly said, "By the way, I finally hit my 6-month goal." We all knew what she meant. She didn't have to say it, and it wasn't awkward. Everyone just congratulated her like she'd announced she'd run a marathon or finished writing a book. In a weird way, she had, just not the kind you can put on a shelf. A few days later, Mia sent me a voice message. I was at my desk editing, so I clicked play without thinking. Her voice came through, calm and casual. "You know, I think the funniest part of all this is that you were too polite to even look. That's kind of rare." I laughed because it was true. Curiosity might have been strong, but my Midwestern level of politeness, despite not even being from the Midwest, was stronger. We ended up chatting for an hour that night about everything except her side hustle. Future travel plans, favorite comfort foods, the fact that neither of us had ever successfully kept a houseplant alive. Somewhere in the middle of it, I realized I'd stopped thinking of her in terms of that discovery. She was just Mia now. My friend who happened to have a business model most people didn't talk about over brunch. It's strange how the initial shock had long faded, replaced by something closer to respect and genuine friendship. And maybe that's the biggest twist. The big reveal ended up being the least interesting thing about her. By the time spring rolled around, the whole project thing had woven itself into my life in such a casual way that I forgot there was ever a time I didn't know about it. We still had our inside jokes, but they were just one layer in a bigger friendship. Now we talked about work stress, weird dreams, and why all grocery store music sounds like it's been filtered through a 1998 karaoke machine. Then one weekend, Mia invited me to a little outdoor market she'd signed up for. Nothing to do with her online business. She'd rented a table to sell handmade bracelets she'd been making as a hobby. I showed up expecting a small setup and maybe a couple curious shoppers. What I walked into looked like a mini celebrity meet and greet. People flocked to her table, chatting and laughing like they'd known her for years. And the wildest part? She was exactly the same in person with strangers as she was with friends. Confident, friendly, totally at ease. When there was finally a lull, I leaned against the edge of her table and said, "You know you could run for mayor, right?" She laughed. "Mayor of what? The bracelet district?" "Mayor of everything," I said. "You've got the charisma for it." She shook her head, but I could see she was quietly pleased. Later that day, as we packed up her table, Mia said something that stuck with me. "You know, when you first found out, I thought you'd treat me differently." I glanced at her, surprised. "Why would I?" "Because people make assumptions. They decide who you are based on one thing, but you didn't." I didn't have some deep, profound answer ready. I just shrugged and said, "Guess I'd like knowing the whole person, not just the headline." She smiled at that, and it wasn't one of those quick, polite smiles. It was the kind you give when someone says something you'll actually remember later. On the drive home, it hit me that this entire story, from Jake's ridiculous bet to the countless cucumber jokes, had actually been one long exercise in learning not to jump to conclusions. The kind of thing that starts as an awkward secret but ends up shaping a friendship in ways you never expect. A couple of weeks later, we were all at Jake's place for what was supposed to be a simple board game night. Naturally, it spiraled into chaos. Halfway through the night, Jake disappeared into his bedroom and came back holding a wrapped package. "Mia," he said with a smirk, "I got you something." She looked suspicious but played along, peeling back the wrapping paper. Inside was a novelty coffee mug with big, bold letters that read, "World's Best Entrepreneur." The room cracked up. I thought Mia would roll her eyes, but instead she held it up like she'd just won an Olympic medal. "Finally," she said. "Something for my resume." That was the thing about her. She never let anyone else control the joke. The moment you thought you might embarrass her, she'd flip it around and own it so hard that you were the one blushing. Later that night, as people were leaving, she filled the mug with soda and handed it to me. "Here, a little shareholder perk." I took a sip, shaking my head. "I'm not even an investor." "You are," she said with a grin. "In spirit." The friendship kept evolving in ways I didn't expect. We started teaming up for random things, helping Claire move apartments, tag teaming grocery runs, and once spending 3 hours in a thrift store making up backstories for the weirdest items we found. At some point during one of these errands, I realized that if someone asked me how Mia and I became friends, I couldn't just say mutual friends. The real story would take half an hour to explain, and even then they wouldn't fully get it unless they'd been there for every smirk, every inside joke, every cucumber reference. That's what made it special. It wasn't about the reveal anymore, it was about everything that came after. The comfortable rhythm of knowing someone well enough that you can say a single word, and they'll burst out laughing because they know exactly what you mean. The full circle moment started brewing on a random Tuesday night. I was sitting at my desk editing when Jake called me out of nowhere. "You busy?" he asked. "Kind of," I said. "Why?" "I've got a new challenge for you." Now, the last time Jake said that, it led to, well, this entire saga. So I was understandably cautious. "This isn't going to end with me accidentally finding out another friend's side hustle, is it?" He laughed. No, no, no. This is different. I want you to pick anyone from our friend group, and I'll try to find something about them online." I groaned. Haven't we learned from last time? But before I could hang up, Mia's name popped up in our group chat. She'd sent a single cucumber emoji with no context. I froze. Jake saw it too because he immediately said, "She's mocking you. We can't let that slide." The next weekend, we all met up for a backyard barbecue at Claire's place. It was sunny, casual, and completely normal, at least until Mia strolled in carrying a small gift bag. She walked straight over to me, handed it over, and said, "For services rendered." I opened it to find a candle. Not just any candle. The label read, "Cucumber Melon, Entrepreneur's Edition." I almost dropped it. I was laughing so hard. "You're unbelievable," I said. She just grinned, and yet entirely predictable. That was when it hit me. This wasn't just a one-off story anymore. It was an ongoing, living inside joke that would probably follow us for years. A little spark of ridiculousness in the middle of everyday life. And honestly, I wouldn't change a thing. By late summer, the cucumber candle had taken up permanent residence on my desk. I never lit it, partly because it was too funny to burn, and partly because I suspected it smelled exactly like the inside of a spa waiting room. But every time I saw it, it made me laugh. And it reminded me of how something that could have been awkward ended up being one of the most unexpectedly good friendships I've had. One evening, Mia and I were sitting outside a coffee shop, sipping iced lattes as the sun went down. Out of nowhere, she said, "You know, it's kind of wild that all this started because of Jake's stupid bet." "Yeah," I said, grinning. "If he hadn't been showing off, I'd probably still think you just sold candles or something." She rolled her eyes. "I do sell candles. You've got one on your desk, remember?" We sat there for a while in comfortable silence, the kind where you don't feel like you need to fill it with words. And I realized then that the real punchline of this whole thing wasn't the discovery, or the jokes, or even the gift card with cucumber trauma written on it. It was the fact that, against all odds, we'd stumbled into a friendship built on trust, humor, and just the right amount of chaos. When I finally told Jake that, he just smirked and said, "You're welcome." I told him not to push his luck, or next time the internet detective experiment might backfire on him. He laughed, but I think I saw a flicker of fear in his eyes. As for Mia, she still sends me random cucumber memes at the most inconvenient times. And every so often, she'll drop a line in conversation like, "Business is booming," just to watch me try not to laugh in public. If there's a lesson in all this, it's probably something about not making snap judgments, or how humor can turn awkwardness into connection. Or maybe it's just that you should never underestimate quiet people, because sometimes they're running empires you'd never imagine. Either way, I'm glad I found her OnlyFans. Not because of the site itself, but because of everything that came after. And if I'm being honest, I still think about that cucumber blog sometimes. A few weeks after that coffee shop evening, Mia texted me a photo of her kitchen counter. In the middle was a neat row of candles, each with a different label: Lavender Fields, Midnight Breeze, and right in the center, Cucumber Melon, Special Edition. Underneath the photo, she'd written, "Limited stock. One day you'll regret not investing early." I replied with, "Still waiting on my shareholder dividends." She sent back a screenshot of a $10 coffee gift card. I couldn't tell if it was generosity or trolling, but I gladly used it the next morning. That became our weird ritual. Every time one of us made a joke about her business, she'd send me a tiny gift card or something equally ridiculous. A stress ball shaped like a pickle, a sticker that said CEO in gold letters. My desk was starting to look like the merch table for a very confused farmer's market. One night, after a particularly long group hangout, we were the last two people lingering in the parking lot. She leaned against her car and said, "You know, someday we're going to have to explain this whole story to someone new, and they're not going to believe it." I laughed. "Yeah, we'll tell them the cucumber version first and see how long it takes before they figure it out." She grinned. "Evil. I like it." That's when it hit me. This wasn't just a random chapter of my life anymore. It was one of those friendship origin stories that gets passed down, reshaped, and exaggerated over time. 10 years from now, I could see us telling it at a dinner party, each of us adding more dramatic pauses and fake details until the other one cracked. And honestly, I hoped that's exactly how it would go. A couple weeks later, Jake decided to host another game night, but this time he announced there would be no surprises. Which, coming from Jake, meant definitely expect surprises. Sure enough, halfway through the evening, he dimmed the lights, cleared the table, and pulled out what he dramatically called the ultimate challenge. It was a stack of index cards, each with a made-up business or side hustle. The idea was to pick one and pitch it to the group like it was a real thing. Claire got luxury lawn gnomes. Sam got pet psychic hotline. Then Mia picked hers, and without missing a beat, she launched into a flawless sales pitch for organic cucumber-scented candles. Empowerment in a jar. The room was dying laughing. She talked about capturing the entrepreneurial spirit and fragrance as a lifestyle choice while I sat there trying not to choke on my drink. By the time she wrapped it up, everyone was applauding like she'd just delivered a TED Talk. Later, as we were leaving, she nudged me and said, "See? You're not the only one who can make this a running joke." I had to admit, she was better at it than me. After that night, it felt like the cucumber candle had evolved into a full-blown mascot for our group. People started gifting each other random cucumber-themed stuff, socks, magnets, even a small plush toy that Jake claimed was the official group pet. Mia leaned all the way into it. She started signing her group chat messages with Dash CEO whenever she made plans. I think she realized what I had from the start. The best way to make something unawkward is to own it so completely that no one can use it against you. One rainy Sunday afternoon, we ended up hanging out at my place. She spotted the original cucumber candle on my desk, still unlit. "You really should burn that," she said. "No way," I replied. "That's a collector's item now." She smirked. "Fine, but if I become world famous, I'm taking it back." I didn't say it out loud, but part of me kind of hoped she would. Not because I wanted to give it up, but because it would mean our weird, funny little friendship had somehow made it even further than either of us expected. A few weeks later, Claire organized a picnic at the park. It was one of those perfect early autumn days. Warm sun, cool breeze, leaves just starting to turn. People brought blankets, food, and way too many desserts. Mia showed up carrying a tote bag that looked suspiciously heavy for just sandwiches. About halfway through the afternoon, she reached into it and pulled out a stack of small, neatly wrapped packages. "I made something for everyone," she said, passing them around. Inside each one was a tiny tea light candle with a printed label that read, "Cucumber Melon, Limited Picnic Edition." Everyone cracked up, of course, but it was also weirdly thoughtful. Even Sam, who'd been out of the loop on the whole cucumber saga, was grinning like he'd been let in on an inside joke. At some point, I found myself sitting on the grass next to Mia while the others were off tossing a frisbee. She watched them for a while, then said, "You know, I didn't think this would end up being fun." "What do you mean?" I asked. "Being found out. I thought it would be humiliating." She shrugged. "But instead, it's like it gave me more friends, more laughs. And honestly, I think I needed that." I didn't have some profound reply ready, so I just said, "Guess we owe Jake for that one." She laughed. "Don't let him hear you say that." By the time winter rolled around, the story had taken on a life of its own. Even people outside our immediate group had heard some version of it, though the details were always wildly inaccurate. One mutual friend swore they'd been told Mia ran a subscription gardening advice channel. Another thought she sold artisanal pickles. We never corrected them. Half the fun was hearing what people came up with. Mia even started keeping a little list in her phone of alternate business identities people had guessed. Motivational speaker, balloon animal sculptor, medieval lute instructor. Every time she read it out loud, we'd all be in tears laughing. One snowy evening, we ended up walking home together after a holiday party. The streets were quiet, just the crunch of our boots on the icy sidewalk. She glanced over at me and said, "You know, if this ever gets turned into a movie, you're definitely the comic relief sidekick." "Excuse me," I said, mock offended. "I am main character material." She smirked. "Sure, we'll put that on the poster." And just like that, we were back to the same easy rhythm we'd had since that very first ridiculous discovery. Only now, it felt permanent. The movie joke stuck around longer than I expected. Over the next couple of weeks, Mia would randomly send me fake casting announcements she'd made in Canva. One had my face awkwardly photoshopped onto a superhero body with the tagline, "From zero to sidekick." Another had her standing heroically in front of a giant cucumber, sunglasses on, with "based on a true story" in dramatic, bold letters. I kept threatening to print them out and hang them in my living room, but she knew I wouldn't, mostly because I didn't trust Jake not to steal them for blackmail purposes. One Friday night, we were all at a pub for trivia, and the final round was Name That Scent. They brought out little jars for each team to sniff and identify. When we got to one with a light, fresh smell, Mia leaned over and whispered, "Cucumber melon." Sure enough, it was right. We got the point, but Jake immediately stood up and announced to the table, "Of course she knew that one." Everyone cracked up. It was in that moment, watching my friends laugh, seeing Mia not only tolerate but join in the joke, that I realized this whole thing had become a weird little anchor for our group. Something harmless, silly, and ours. It didn't matter that the origin story was strange. What mattered was that it had given us a shared language, a running gag that made even the most ordinary days a little more entertaining. One evening not long after, I was cleaning up my apartment and came across a small box I'd shoved under my bed. Inside were all the gifts Mia had given me over the past year. The gift cards, the stickers, the stress ball pickle, and of course, the original cucumber candle. I sat there on the floor for a while, just looking at them and smiling like an idiot. It hit me then that friendships aren't always built in the obvious ways. Sometimes they start in the middle of a joke you didn't even realize you were telling. Sometimes they grow out of something that should have been embarrassing, but somehow turned into a badge of honor. I sent Mia a photo of the box with the caption, "The Archives." She replied almost instantly, "That belongs in a museum." And maybe she was right, because for all the chaos and randomness that started it, I knew I'd hang on to those little mementos for a long time. They weren't just reminders of her project. They were reminders of all the laughs, late-night chats, and inside jokes that had turned us into real friends. Spring came around again, marking roughly a year since Jake's infamous internet detective bet. By then, the cucumber candle had almost become a myth in the group. People would bring it up like some ancient relic from a legendary quest. One sunny Saturday, Mia and I were sitting at a little cafe sipping iced coffee. She tapped her cup and said, "So, anniversary of the great discovery. Should we do something to celebrate?" I laughed. "What do you have in mind? Renew our friendship vows over a candle?" Her eyes lit up. "Yes, exactly that." 2 days later, she showed up at my apartment with a tiny cake, 2 mismatched mugs, and, you guessed it, the cucumber candle. She set it on my coffee table, lit it with the kind of ceremony you'd expect for the opening of the Olympics, and said, "Here's to a year of questionable bets, excellent inside jokes, and never letting Jake pick a challenge again." We clinked mugs, ate cake, and spent the next few hours just talking about life. Jobs, travel plans, random things we wanted to try. The candle flickered between us the whole time, filling the room with that oddly nostalgic cucumber melon scent. At some point, I realized I wasn't even thinking about the project anymore. I was just enjoying the company of someone who'd gone from a casual acquaintance to one of my favorite people. And maybe that was the real magic of it all. The way something strange and unexpected had quietly turned into something steady and familiar. About a week after our anniversary celebration, Jake found out about it. Not because we told him, but because Mia accidentally posted a photo of the lit candle on her Instagram story. The caption just said tradition, but that was enough for him to connect the dots. He called me immediately. "You had a whole party and didn't invite me?" "It wasn't a party," I said. "It was cake and a candle, that's it." "That's a party," he argued. "And you lit the candle without me? That's betrayal." The next group hangout, he walked in carrying an enormous cucumber from the grocery store, slapped it down on the table, and said, "If you're going to have rituals, at least make them authentic." Mia didn't miss a beat. Perfect. Now all we need is a melon, and we can really start a cult. Everyone laughed, but the funny part was how normal it all felt now. A year ago, the whole situation had been this delicate, semi-awkward secret. Now it was just part of our group's DNA, woven in with all the other ridiculous traditions we'd accidentally built over time. That night, as people were leaving, Mia hung back to help me clean up. She picked up the cucumber Jake had brought and said, "We should make pickles out of this. Close the loop." I smirked. "You're just trying to make the joke last another year." She shrugged. "Hey, if it works, it works." And honestly, I kind of hoped it would. A couple weeks later, Mia texted me a photo of a mason jar filled with freshly made pickles. The label? Cucumber melon. Limited culinary edition. I laughed so hard I nearly dropped my phone. "When did you even learn how to pickle?" I wrote back. Her reply came instantly. "YouTube is free." The next time I saw her, she handed me a jar. "Official shareholder dividend," she said with mock seriousness. I cracked it open when I got home, and they were honestly amazing. Crisp, tangy, just the right amount of sweetness. Which was a problem because now she had yet another skill to weaponize in our ongoing joke war. Not long after, Jake invited us over for a movie night. Halfway through, during a scene where the main character discovers some big secret, Mia leaned over and whispered, "Feels familiar, huh?" I nearly choked on my popcorn. That was the thing about her. Even a year later, she still knew exactly when to drop the perfect callback. By this point, the Great Discovery had become less of a single story and more of a series of connected mini-chapters. New friends came into the group and heard different versions of it. Some were almost accurate, some were completely absurd, and we never corrected them. It was more fun that way. One crisp autumn evening, a bunch of us were sitting around a backyard fire pit. Someone asked how our friend group even formed, and Claire immediately pointed at me and said, "Tell them the candle story." I hesitated. Are we talking full truth or extended cinematic universe? "Extended cinematic universe," Mia said, grinning. So I told it. The ridiculous bet with Jake, the cucumber blog, the accidental discovery, the candle, the anniversary party, and now the pickles. I embellished where it felt right, added dramatic pauses, and milked the laughs. By the end, everyone was in stitches. When the laughter died down, Mia gave me this quiet smile. It wasn't the sarcastic smirk or playful grin I was used to. It was the kind of smile that said thanks for making this fun. And it hit me, sitting there under the string lights with friends I genuinely loved being around, that this whole saga had turned something potentially awkward into something we'd probably still be laughing about decades from now. Eventually, the night wound down. People trickled out, saying their goodbyes. Mia and I were the last ones there, tossing the last bits of wood into the fire. The air smelled faintly like smoke and burnt marshmallow. "You know," she said, poking the embers with a stick, "one day this won't be the funniest thing we remember. We'll have new stories, new inside jokes." "Yeah," I said, "but this will always be the first." She nodded at that. We sat in comfortable silence for a moment, watching the fire shrink to glowing coals. Then she added, "Still can't believe you didn't even subscribe." I laughed. "I'm old-fashioned. I prefer candles." She shook her head, smiling, and we both knew that no matter how many new stories we added, this one would always be ours. Looking back now, it's funny how quickly things shifted from shock to laughter, from awkward to effortless. One random night, one dumb bet, and suddenly there's a candle on my desk that means more to me than most expensive gifts ever could. If you told me before all this that I'd end up with a friendship forged out of a strange discovery and an endless parade of cucumber jokes, I would have laughed in your face. But here we are, still laughing, still making up new chapters, still making sure Jake never lives down his role as the instigator. So maybe the lesson isn't about not judging people or keeping an open mind, though those things are true. Maybe it's about how the weirdest moments are often the ones that stick, the ones that make life feel a little less predictable. And if you're lucky, those moments turn into people you can count on, even if they occasionally drop a cucumber emoji into the group chat just to mess with you. Either way, the candle stays unlit. Some things are just too good to burn. And that's where we'll leave it for tonight, my Reddit story lovers. Thanks for staying with me right to the end. I hope this one brought you a smile or two before you drift off. If you enjoyed the ride, don't forget to like the video, subscribe to Bedtime Blocks, and let me know in the comments what kind of story you'd like to hear next. Until then, sleep well, dream easy, and I'll see you in the next one.